You know that feeling. Not sadness exactly, not depression, something quieter than that, something that can hit you in a crowded room full of people who know your name. You're surrounded, and somehow still completely alone. That feeling has a name: loneliness, and it's one of the most painful human experiences that exists. Scientists have compared it to physical pain, not metaphorically. Literally, the same brain regions that process a broken bone process the feeling of being truly alone. Now here's the question that nobody asks. Did ancient humans feel this? A prehistoric person sitting in a group of 30 people they'd known their entire lives. Same camp, same fire, same faces every single day for years. Could they still feel lonely? And if loneliness is this deep, this biological, this painful, what does that tell us about what humans actually need to survive? The answer reaches back further than you'd expect, and it changes everything about how you understand yourself. Here's what most people assume. Ancient humans couldn't have been lonely. They were never alone. They lived in tight groups of 30 to 50 people. Constant contact, constant company. Loneliness is a modern problem, a side effect of cities, screens, and people who live in apartments and don't know their neighbors' names. That assumption is wrong. Not slightly wrong, fundamentally wrong, because loneliness was never about being physically alone. Scientists figured that out relatively recently, and once they did, the entire history of human loneliness had to be rewritten. Loneliness is about feeling unseen, feeling like nobody around you actually knows who you are, feeling disconnected even when you're surrounded. Sound familiar? It should, because that experience, that specific, quiet, internal ache, is one of the oldest things about being human. Let's start with the neuroscience, because to understand ancient loneliness, you first have to understand what loneliness actually is. In 2008, neuroscientist John Cacioppo at the University of Chicago published research that rewrote how science understood loneliness. He spent over 2 decades studying it. What he found was not what anyone expected. Loneliness isn't an emotion, it's a biological signal. The same way hunger tells your body it needs food, loneliness tells your brain it needs meaningful social connection. Not just proximity to other humans, not just being around people. Meaningful connection, being known, being understood. Cacioppo found that chronically lonely people showed elevated cortisol levels, the stress hormone. Their immune systems were suppressed. Their sleep was disrupted even when they had no clinical reason for insomnia. Their cardiovascular systems were under measurable strain. Loneliness was killing people, slowly, quietly, from the inside. He then made a claim that shocked the scientific community. Loneliness, he argued, is an evolutionary adaptation, not a malfunction, not a modern disease, a feature. Think about that for a moment. Your ancestors who felt the pain of disconnection strongly, who felt it so badly that they couldn't ignore it, those ancestors fixed it. They repaired broken relationships. They worked harder to be understood. They stayed in the group. They survived. Your ancestors who didn't feel it strongly, who could drift away from the group without psychological pain, those ancestors wandered off, alone, into a world full of predators and starvation. They didn't make it. You are descended from the lonely ones, the ones who felt it so badly they couldn't stand it, the ones for whom disconnection was physically painful. Loneliness didn't evolve to make you miserable. It evolved to keep you alive. Now let's talk about ancient groups. Because if loneliness is a biological signal for meaningful connection, ancient humans had everything they needed to avoid it, right? Wrong again. Here's something anthropologists discovered that nobody talks about. Ancient human groups were not harmonious utopias. They were complicated, messy, politically charged social environments full of the same tensions that make modern offices unbearable. Anthropologist Christopher Boehm spent decades studying hunter-gatherer social dynamics. His book Hierarchy in the Forest documents something remarkable. Ancient human groups were constantly managing social tension, gossip, exclusion, status battles, favoritism, and crucially social exclusion. Because in a group of 30 people, being excluded didn't mean being left out of a party. It meant being cut off from food sharing, from protection, from everything you needed to survive. Social exclusion in the ancient world was a death sentence delivered slowly, and ancient humans knew it. Boehm documented that the fear of exclusion, the fear of being pushed to the margins of the group, was one of the most powerful forces shaping ancient human behavior. People modified how they acted, what they said, how they presented themselves, all to avoid the specific terror of being socially invisible. That terror is loneliness, ancient loneliness. Not from being physically alone, from being surrounded by people and feeling like none of them would miss you if you disappeared. Sound familiar? But here's where the story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. Because ancient humans didn't just experience loneliness, they developed something to fight it, something so sophisticated, so uniquely human, that no other species on Earth has it. And you use it every single day without knowing what it is. storytelling, not as entertainment, as medicine. In 2014, anthropologist Polly Wiessner recorded hundreds of hours of conversation from the Jew hoansi people, one of the oldest continuous cultures on Earth. She analyzed what people talked about and when. During the day, conversations were practical: food, tools, plans, information. But at night, around the fire, something shifted. 81% of nighttime conversation was stories, myths, legends, tales of ancestors, stories about people who felt things deeply, who struggled, who suffered, who survived. Wiessner argued that this wasn't coincidence. Nighttime storytelling served a specific psychological function. It was the mechanism by which ancient humans said to each other, "Your feelings are real. You are not alone in them. Other people, even people who lived before you, felt exactly what you feel." This is the oldest known antidepressant, the oldest known cure for loneliness. Story. Think about what a myth actually is. At its core, every myth ever told is a story about someone who felt lost, disconnected, alone, and either found their way back to connection or was destroyed by the absence of it. Humans have been telling each other these stories for at least 100,000 years. Maybe longer. Every religion, every legend, every epic poem, every novel, every film you've ever watched that made you feel less alone, all of it is the same ancient technology, evolved in firelit camps by people who needed to hear that their loneliness was shared. You watched a movie last week and felt understood by a fictional character. Your ancestor sat by a fire 50,000 years ago and felt understood by a story about an ancestor who no longer existed. Same need, same solution, different fire. But storytelling wasn't the only tool ancient humans developed. Let's talk about grooming, because this sounds simple, but it's actually profound. Primates groom each other. Monkeys, chimpanzees, gorillas, they spend enormous amounts of time picking through each other's fur. For a long time, scientists assumed this was purely hygienic, removing parasites, keeping clean. Then, Robin Dunbar came along and ruined that assumption completely. Dunbar studied grooming behavior across dozens of primate species and discovered something extraordinary. The amount of time a primate group spent grooming each other correlated almost perfectly with group size and specifically with the complexity of their social relationships. Grooming wasn't just cleaning, it was social bonding. It released oxytocin, the bonding hormone, in both the groomer and the one being groomed. It was physical, tangible proof that someone chose to spend their time on you, that you mattered enough to touch. Dunbar then asked, what do humans do instead of grooming? We can't groom 150 people efficiently. It would take all day. His answer? We talk. Specifically, we laugh, we share personal information, we gossip, we tell each other things we haven't told anyone else. Every time a human shares something vulnerable with another human, something private, something real, they're doing the cognitive equivalent of grooming. They're saying, I trust you enough to let you see me. And the response, being seen, being heard, being understood without judgment, releases the same oxytocin that grooming released for our primate ancestors. This is why a deep conversation with one person can make you feel less lonely than a party full of 100 people you barely know. Your ancient brain isn't counting bodies, it's counting moments of genuine contact. Let's rebuild a moment of ancient loneliness. The group has been moving for 3 days. New territory. Unfamiliar sounds at night. The social dynamics have been strained. 2 people argued badly yesterday, and the tension hasn't fully dissolved. The usual easy laughter is quieter than normal. You find yourself sitting slightly apart from the group. Not far, just far enough. You know everyone here, every face, every voice, every habit. And tonight, for some reason you can't fully explain, none of that feels like enough. You feel like a stranger in the only home you've ever known. This is ancient loneliness, not caused by isolation, caused by disconnection, by the feeling that the people around you are present, but not truly with you. What do? You move closer to the fire. Someone shifts to make room. Someone else starts talking something funny that happened during the day. Laughter moves around the circle. Slowly the tension in your chest loosens. Someone nudges your shoulder with theirs. Doesn't say anything. Just contact. Just presence. That nudge, that wordless gesture is doing something biological. Releasing oxytocin. Telling your nervous system, you are seen. You are not invisible. You are here, and someone knows it. By the time the fire burns low, the loneliness has passed. Not because anything changed, because connection happened. Small, ordinary, unremarkable connection. That was the cure then. It's still the cure now. Now here's something that surprised even the researchers who found it. Ancient humans experienced loneliness differently depending on their role in the group. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies found consistent patterns around specific types of loneliness that appeared across cultures, across continents, across thousands of years. The first type was leadership loneliness. In ancient groups, decisions had to be made. Someone had to call the hunt early. Someone had to say we need to move camp now even when others disagreed. Someone had to make choices that couldn't be made by committee, and those people, the ones who carried that weight, experienced a specific form of loneliness that archaeologists can actually trace. In burial sites across Africa and Europe, researchers consistently find a pattern. Certain individuals buried with elaborate grave goods tools, ornaments, objects of meaning were positioned differently from group burials, sometimes slightly apart, sometimes with more objects but fewer people buried near them. Some researchers interpret this as status. Others see something more complex. The person most central to the group's survival, buried at its edge. Leadership loneliness. The specific ache of being responsible for people who can't fully understand the weight you carry. The second type was grief loneliness. Anthropologist Barbara King spent years studying grief in animals and humans. What she found in ancient human burial practices was remarkable. Evidence of prolonged mourning. Bodies decorated with flowers, ochre, meaningful objects. Graves revisited, marked, tended, returned to. Ancient humans grieved deeply, and grief is perhaps the most isolating form of loneliness because it's loneliness for a specific person who no longer exists. A loneliness that nobody else in the group can fully share even when they try. The third type was the loneliness of being different. In every ancient group studied, there were individuals who didn't quite fit the expected patterns. The one who spent more time making things than hunting. The one who seemed to feel things more deeply than others, the one whose mind went to places nobody else seemed to follow. These people weren't always excluded. Often they were valued as artists, as healers, as the ones who could see patterns others missed. But valued is not the same as understood. And understanding is what loneliness actually hungers for. And here's the part that connects all of this directly to you, right now. Today, because the loneliness epidemic we talk about in modern society, the one researchers call a public health crisis, it didn't appear from nowhere. It didn't appear because of phones or social media or modern life. It appeared because something ancient got broken, and understanding what got broken tells you exactly what to do about it. In 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General released an advisory declaring loneliness a public health epidemic. Not a personal problem, a public health crisis on the scale of smoking and obesity. The numbers were staggering. Over half of American adults reported measurable loneliness. Young people aged 18 to 24, the most connected generation in history by every technological measure, were the loneliest demographic ever recorded. More connected, more lonely. How? John Cacioppo's research gives the answer. Modern life broke three specific things that ancient humans had built into every single day. The first was proximity. Ancient humans were physically close to their group constantly, not by choice, by necessity. Bodies in contact, shoulders touching, shared warmth, shared breath. Modern humans can go entire days without meaningful physical contact with another person, and the body registers that absence as a threat signal. The second was consistency. Ancient humans saw the same faces every single day for years, decades, entire lifetimes. Modern humans change cities, change jobs, change social circles so frequently that deep long-term knowing, the kind of knowing where someone understands your history, your patterns, your specific version of being human, has become rare. The third was vulnerability. Ancient humans around a campfire, telling stories in the dark, were doing something that required exposure. Saying, here is what I feel, here is what I fear, here is something real about me. Modern social interaction, curated, filtered, performed, does the opposite. We show versions of ourselves, polished versions, safe versions, and polished versions don't cure loneliness. Because loneliness isn't about being unseen by strangers, it's about being unseen by people who know you. Your ancient ancestors were bad at performing. They were just themselves, constantly, unavoidably, and in that unavoidable authenticity, they saw each other in ways that modern humans rarely manage. Let's go back to that fire one more time. It's deep into the night now. Most people are asleep, but a few are still awake, the ones whose minds won't quiet easily. They sit close together in the remaining warmth, not because they plan to, but because the fire is there and so are they. Someone says something quiet, something real, something they haven't said out loud before. Nobody fixes it. Nobody offers advice. Someone just says yes. I know that feeling. I've felt that too. And something in the chest of the person who spoke loosens, not because the problem is solved, because it was witnessed, because in the dark, in the quiet, in the smallest possible way, they were seen. That moment, that tiny, unremarkable, sacred moment, is what humans evolved to need. Not followers, not likes, not an audience, just one person, in the dark, who sees you. You live in the most connected era in human history. You can reach thousands of people with a single post. You can video call someone on the other side of the planet. You can find communities of people who share your most niche interests within seconds. And you are lonelier than your ancestors, who never left a 30-mile radius their entire lives. Because connection was never about quantity, it was never about reach. It was never about being known by many. It was about being known completely by a few. Your ancient brain doesn't want an audience. It wants a witness. Someone who knows your history. Someone who notices when you're off. Someone who would genuinely register your absence if you weren't there tomorrow. We optimized for reach and lost depth. We optimized for quantity and lost quality. We built the largest social networks in human history and somehow managed to be more alone than the people who sat in caves. The loneliness your ancestors felt was a signal that drove them toward each other. The loneliness you feel has the same signal, the same biology, the same ancient ache.
The only question is whether you listen to it. Loneliness is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a sign that something is right, that your brain is working exactly as it was designed to work by 300,000 years of human evolution, that you are a social creature in an increasingly unsocial world, and your nervous system is honest enough to tell you so. Your ancestors felt it too, around fires that have been cold for thousands of years, in groups of people they knew completely, in a world that was trying to kill them in 100 ways, and somehow loneliness still made the list of things that hurt. Because being truly known by another person is not a luxury. It was never a luxury. It is the thing, the actual thing. The reason humans survived everything the world threw at them for 300,000 years, not because we were strong enough, not because we were fast enough, because we needed each other badly enough that we kept finding our way back. You were built for that. You still are. Find your fire. Find your people. Let them see you. That's all it ever was. Subscribe for the next surprising topic.